don't need to use much downward pressure at all. It's literally just the round and round of the twisting the drill bit. And because the clay isn't fired yet, it's so easy to get through. So I'm going to very gently just round and round. I'm going to stop and check I'm in the right place. I don't want to drill it crooked. And really be careful not to use too much pressure or you'll snap the point off at the end there. And it doesn't take very long to get through. And I'm just going to go in from the back as well to even up the hole. And now we've got a nice neat hole right where we want it. For our stone setting project, which is a 2-layered pendant with a loop on the back, we need to set our little CZ, which is a heat-proof stone, down into the clay, and we need to set it down there in there far enough that the shrinkage of the clay will hold the stone in place. Now, I don't like to just push the stone down into the clay because you'll be displacing clay as you push that stone in there. The clay that you're pushing has to go somewhere and you end up with a little bit of a sort of smushed look on the back. And I also like to cut a hole all the way through so that I think it adds a little bit more sparkle. So we need to cut a hole all the way through both layers of our clay, and our stone is very tiny here. I'm hoping you can see well enough on this dark background. So we need to find out what size of hole to cut for the stone to sit in. And if it's too big, the stone's just going to fall right back out of the pendant. And if it's too small, then when we push the stone in, we're still displacing clay and making a bit of a smushed looking hole. So to find the right hole cutter size, I'm turning my stone face down so the point is in the air here, and I'm going to try a couple of different hole cutters over that point. And you can see that this one completely goes down the side of the stone and obscures it, so that's too big. Okay, that's way too big. And then this one, which is a little syringe tip, just sits right on the point, and it's probably not big enough because I can still see a lot of the stone around the edge. So if I cut a little hole this size, I might well still be squishing quite a lot of clay when I push my stone in there. Let's try this one. And this one is just right because it goes over the point there and covers up quite a bit of the stone, but I can still see the girdle of the stone out around the edge of that straw. So I know that if I cut a hole this size and sit my stone on there ready to be pushed in, I'm just going to have to push it in very slightly, and I won't be displacing a huge amount of clay because it's almost the right size for the actual stone. It's almost the same size as the stone, but it's not too big for it to fall out the back. It's a little bit hard to see that, so I'm going to use a giant version here. This is what it looks like on a giant version. We've got the point down here and we've got the shoulders here, and there's the table at the top. And when we set it, we want the point down into the clay, sitting in the hole that we've cut. So let's imagine that this sideways on is my clay, and I've got this deep piece of clay here. And if when I set my stone, it's sitting up above the clay like this, or even as low as this, there's a possibility that as the clay shrinks during the firing, it's going to push in on both sides and push that stone out. And what we actually want is for the shrinkage to hold the stone in place. So what we need to do is actually set the stone, after we've cut our hole, down far enough under that clay so that when we look at it sideways on, we can't see this table above the surface of the clay. All right, so you hold it sideways on, you don't want to see that poking up above the surface of the clay. And that then should, in theory, when you come to fire it, shrink all around this edge here and hold your stone in place all around the girdle. Now whenever I'm adding syringe, I usually work on a playing card. Let's find a flattish one, there we go. So that I've got a work surface that I can move around. If I was working down here and I'm trying to add syringe on here and I've got my fingers trying to turn this thing, I'm in danger of rubbing off or smearing the syringe that I've just put on there. So a movable work mat here is a good plan. Top tip. Wherever we're adding the syringe, which is fresh clay, onto the dried clay, we're going to want a little bit of water or slip. And I'm just going to keep it very basic. We don't need to see a highly embellished piece, but we do need to see that it's stayed in place so that you've remembered to use your slip so that it's stayed in place after it's fired and polished. Now, some people use the syringes this way. I find and that's fine. I find I've got more control if I hold it this way and my thumb is up here pushing the plunger, and I'm kind of resting down a bit more. I can rest on this knuckle here a bit easier, and I'm quite close to the area that I'm trying to control. I find that if I'm up here and pushing, I'm quite a long way away from where I'm trying to actually add the element, and there's an awful lot of movement that's going on there. So getting in close means I've got a bit more control. Just make sure this is working. Yep. So I'm getting in close and laying down the lines here. When I get to the end, I'm going to scoop over the edge, okay, to cut off the area. The line of syringe, cut it off, bring it to an end. If you don't like something you've done, you can simply remove it with your toothpick. And you can't put it back in your syringe though, okay? Don't make the mistake of pulling out the plunger and trying to put your clay back in. You'll end up with a serious airlock going on in there. And my slip is drying out quite quickly. And I didn't like the way that had come out, so I just took it off. I'm going back in again, and it's curling up at the ends, so I want to, there, that's better. So I'm kind of squeezing it out and laying it down rather than dragging and pulling at it. And a little bit more slip. This last little bit along here. And sometimes you can actually get in there with a narrow paintbrush. This is a little bit on the large side. And straighten up your lines if you need to. And this will also help to seal all those edges down against the dried clay. Once your silver clay pieces have dried out, it's likely that you'll need to attend to the edges, especially if you've used a cutter like this where there's a slight overlap, and this can cause a bit of a ridge in the outside edge. So you can get rid of this using a simple nail file or some sanding pads. If you're going to do that though, you need to make sure you're wearing a dust mask to protect yourself from any dust that you might be breathing. Some people use baby wipes to clean up the edges of their pieces, and you need to just be careful not to get too much moisture on the surface texture. What we're looking for is a well-defined and considered finished edge on your pieces. And don't forget that any dust that you sand off with your sanding sticks can be put back into your slip pot to be recycled and reused. There are 3 ways to fire your silver clay. You can torch fire it, you can fire it on the stove top, and you can kiln fire the silver clay. Torch firing and stovetop firing are perfectly adequate for small items that don't require a great deal of strength, like earrings, but for maximum strength we'd recommend kiln firing. And the strongest sintering and the maximum shrinkage seems to come from a 2-hour firing at 900 degrees C. This is an example of the type of equipment you're going to need to be able to do your torch firing of your silver clay at home. I've got a refillable butane torch. I've got some tweezers in case I need to move anything around that's going to be hot. I've got a steel grid which I'm going to do my firing on top of, and that rests on a heatproof brick. And here at the Jewellery School we've also got a secondary heatproof mat underneath just to make sure and be on the safe side. You'll need some way of timing how long you're doing your firing for. So you might want to get yourself a little egg timer, you might have one of these already, and I've actually got a timer on my phone which I use. Most importantly of all is you must protect your eyes when you're doing your firing, so make sure you wear some safety goggles. So the equipment you need doesn't need to cost a huge amount of money, and it's not going to take up much room, but we do recommend that you do your torch firing in a well ventilated area. You can use this type of torch to fire your silver clay pieces at home, and they're widely available. Some of the jewellery suppliers sell them and some of the cookery stores sell them. They're butane and they're refillable with a canister like this, and you need to wear safety goggles whenever you're doing any torch firing or using a naked flame. Can't afford to take risks with your eyes, so make sure you wear some safety goggles. If a lot of them have these bases on, which makes them a bit more steady. They don't fall over quite so easily when they've got their base on. And if you remove that base and look underneath, you'll see that there's a valve down here which will enable us to refill the torch. It's crucial that you make sure that the torch is off and cooled down before you start to try and refill it. And as a matter of habit, I tend to just kind of blow on the end to make sure that there isn't a tiny little flame in there that I can't quite see before I start to refill it. You also want to make sure that you're doing your refilling away from any other source of naked flame. I'm going to fill up the torch now, and I'm going to put the nozzle down into the valve here and push down firmly. And you'll hear it hissing, and you'll know it's full when it starts to spurt out of the top like that. Okay, so the spurting out indicates that it's full and you need to stop. I'm going to show you how to get your torch lit now. So the first thing I need to do is put my safety goggles on. The main controls on the torch are here at the back, which is the ignition, here on the side, which is the safety lock, and on the opposite side we've got the volume up and down. You can turn your gas up and down here, and on top we've got the air control. So I'm going to show you how all that works. So I'm going to push the ignition button at the back, which will light the gas for us, and I'm going to lock my safety lock on, and that means the gas flow continues and I can take my finger off of the trigger at the back. On the opposite side here we've got the volume control, where we can turn our gas up and down if we need to. And the control at the top here dictates how much air is passing through the gas and the flame, and it adjusts at the top. It might be hot when you do this, so be careful. And you can make a very pointy flame if you need to, and that might be useful if you were soldering. You can also make a pretty bushy flame, and we want something in between for firing our silver clay, something not too pointy and not too bushy. To turn the torch off again, I'm going to unlock the safety lock on the side here, and that will cut off the gas supply. Everything does remain hot for quite a while though, so you do need to be careful. After all your pieces have been fired, this is what they'll look like. And these are the sum total of all the pieces you'll need. We've got our 2 pairs of earrings, and here you can see the shrinkage really clearly between the PMC Plus earrings and the PMC Original earrings. We've got our 2 beads, our 2 pendants and our little shell charm, and we're going to go ahead and polish these up next. Because if you've done your firing correctly, they shouldn't look shiny. If they're shiny when you've finished torch firing, or they come out the kiln, it means they've been slightly overheated. So this is how they should look when they've been fired properly. There's a variety of things that we can use to polish our pieces, and I'm just going to run through some of the most basic ones. We've got steel brushes, brass brushes and a burnisher, and these are all very affordable and very easily available to you. The steel brushes can be used dry, and what we're doing is just polishing up the surface really, and it takes a little bit of time, but you'll soon see that they start to come up shinier than they were. And you can also get the steel brush in one of these forms, which means you can get into areas that might be tricky otherwise. And if you're going to use a brass bristle brush, then you need to use it with some soapy water, otherwise it can deposit a layer of brass onto the surface of your silver. So I'm going to go ahead and gradually work my way through these, and then I'll show you a little bit about the burnishing as well. So let's start with our earrings here. You can see that the PMC Original earrings have warped a little bit in the firing, and that's to be expected. And now that they're fired is the time to flatten them out. And you can do this by either pushing down on them with your finger, because it's fine silver, so it's not terribly tough, to help to flatten them out. And if that doesn't work, you could use something like a rawhide hammer, not a steel one which would mark the silver, and just give them a gentle tap. And this will flatten them out for you. So now I'm going to start to polish them up, and I'm using a brass bristle brush and some soapy water. So you can see fairly quickly the difference between the two in not much time. And the back looks different too. I'm going to continue working on this one, so we've still got a comparison with the original, and I'm going to go in with my burnisher and just highlight certain areas. And the burnisher really compacts the surface of the silver and makes it shine, and I'll quite often use this on the edges of my silver. And so what I'm doing is rubbing with the steel burnisher, and a burnisher can be anything really, a highly polished piece of steel. It could be the back of a steel spoon, a nail, anything that's highly polished steel will do this compressing of the silver for us. So I'm just pressing and rubbing gently. And that's going to give me a very nice high shine on the edge there. I can also do this across the surface, but I'm going to be very careful not to scratch with the sharp point of this. I'm going to be continuing to use the sides of the burnisher. And this is going to really shine up the raised surface that I've got here in my texture and highlight certain areas. So now we've got some really shiny surface areas, and you can see how that compares. I've already talked about some low-tech ways that you can polish at home with a brass bristle brush or a steel brush and a burnisher, but you might want to invest in a tumble polisher, or your local support centre might have a tumble polisher, and basically it's a drum with steel shot inside, and the steel effectively does the job of your burnisher. So your PMC or art clay silver pieces will go in with the steel shot with a liquid solution into the tumble polisher and go around and around and around, and all the steel shot will burnish the edges and the texture and the surface of your piece, and you'll end up with a super shiny piece. If you decide to have these tumble polished, then you really want to put a piece of wire through the middle here before you put it in the tumbler, and twist that up together, and this will stop the tumble shot that's inside the tumble polisher from getting stuck down inside your piece. And you might still find there's a few little pieces jammed in there, but you'll be able to untwist your wire and jiggle it out, and the pieces that are jammed in there will become unstuck. Otherwise it's very tricky to get them all out from in there. Let's talk about the bench peg here for a minute. You can buy these fairly cheaply from lots of different places, and they consist of a wooden bench peg and a metal anvil that will screw onto a tabletop. And the wooden part has a flat side and a sloping side, and I tend to use the sloping side when I need to do any filing, and the flat side when I need to do some sawing. And I'm going to get it back attached on the flat side here. Get it screwed on nice and tightly. When the bench peg first arrives, it's flush across the end here, straight across. And over time you'll find yourself cutting nicks in there and little grooves to be able to support the pieces that you're working on. And any old bench pegs end up as a little stub, and then you can replace the wooden part as time